I spent 6 months planning the perfect homecoming for my husband, only to have a stranger walk through my front door, clutching her pregnant belly and claiming the child was his. I thought infidelity was the tragedy, but I was wrong. That fake pregnancy was just the opening act of a script written to end my life and steal my fortune. To survive the man I loved, I had to become the monster he feared. My name is Sarah Vance, and for a fleeting moment on that crisp autumn evening, I believed I held the world in the palm of my hand. I stood beneath the cascading crystal chandelier of our estate in the Hamptons, surrounded by the murmur of anticipation. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. Everyone who mattered in the business world was there, holding flutes of vintage champagne, waiting to welcome back the other half of the Vance Dunn empire. Mark was returning home after 6 months abroad, a grueling separation required to secure our market expansion in Europe. I smoothed the silk of my emerald gown, my heart battering against my ribs like a nervous teenager. I missed him with a physical ache that had made the last half-year feel like a century. The heavy oak doors swung open and silence fell over the room before erupting into applause. Mark stepped across the threshold, looking tan and devastatingly handsome in a bespoke charcoal suit. He did not look at the investors or the curious socialites. He looked straight at me. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and swept me into his arms, his kiss possessing a hunger that made my knees weak. It was a kiss that promised me the distance had only strengthened us, and that every lonely night had been the price for this perfect reunion. He pulled back, smiling that boyish smile that had charmed me over a decade ago, and raised his glass to the crowd. Just as the crystal rim touched his lips, the doorbell chimed. It was a jarring, discordant sound that cut through the celebratory hum. The caterers were all accounted for, and the guests had all arrived. The front door opened again, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A young woman stood there. She was beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, but my eyes were immediately drawn to the undeniable curve of her stomach beneath her tight dress. Her name was Elena. I did not know it then, but she was the architect of my ruin. She walked into the center of the room with a terrifying confidence. She looked at Mark, then at me, and announced in a voice that reached every corner of the hall that she was carrying Mark's child. She claimed it was the son and heir he had always wanted, the legacy I had failed to give him after 10 years of marriage. The silence that followed was suffocating. I turned to Mark, desperate for him to laugh, to call security, to tell me this woman was deranged. Instead, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of tragic guilt. Elena did not stop there. She reached into her purse and threw a stack of photographs onto the hors d'oeuvres table. Pictures of them in Paris, in Rome, in hotels I had booked for him. She produced flight tickets and printed text messages that detailed their intimate nights. The guests swarmed forward to look, their whispers turning into a roar of scandal. I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision began to tunnel. I looked at Mark one last time before the darkness took me, and in that split second before I hit the floor, I saw it. Mark and Elena exchanged a look. It was not the look of a caught cheater and his mistress. It was cold, precise, and terrifyingly calm. They looked like 2 generals acknowledging the successful start of a war. I woke up hours later in our master bedroom. The party was over. The house was dead silent. Mark was sitting in the armchair next to the bed, his head in his hands. When he saw I was awake, he dropped to his knees beside me, weeping. He begged for forgiveness, but his apology was twisted. He told me he had been so lonely in Europe. He told me that I had been so consumed by the company, so obsessed with the quarterly figures, that he had felt abandoned long before he left. He made his betrayal sound like a consequence of my ambition. I tried to argue, to scream at him, but a sudden, splitting headache blinded me. I looked down at my hands resting on the duvet and realized the tips of my fingers were numb. I rubbed them together but felt nothing. I told myself it was just the shock, the physical manifestation of a broken heart. I had no idea that the numbness was not from grief, but the first symptom of a much slower, quieter death he had planned for me. The days that followed the party blurred into a gray nightmare of humiliation. Mark did not send Elena away. Instead, he installed her in a penthouse at the Sterling, a luxury complex less than 2 miles from our front gate. He claimed it was about taking responsibility for the child, forcing me to swallow the indignity of having his mistress living just down the road. He told me I was being unreasonable when I demanded she leave the state. He told me I needed to accept our new reality. Then the sickness set in. It started with my hair. I would wake up to find strands of it on my pillowcase, dark webs against the white silk. Then came the mental fog. I forgot a board meeting for the first time in my career. I stood in the hallway of our home, unable to remember why I had walked out of the bedroom. Every evening, Mark would bring me a cup of pungent herbal tea, insisting it would help me sleep. I drank it because I wanted to trust him, but every morning I woke up with a metallic taste in my mouth and a nausea that made the room spin. Mark used these moments of weakness to whisper his suggestions. He said I looked tired. He said I was burning out. He suggested I sign over temporary power of attorney so he could handle the company while I recovered from what he called my nervous breakdown. Elena began to escalate her torment. She sent packages to the house addressed to Mark and me. First, it was a silver rattle. Then a stroller was delivered to the front porch. When a box of baby clothes arrived with a note thanking us for our understanding, something inside me snapped. I screamed and swept a collection of antique Ming vases off the mantel. They shattered with a satisfying crash. But the satisfaction was short-lived. Mark was standing in the doorway holding his phone, the red recording light blinking. He did not look angry. He looked pitying. He showed the video to Dr. Aris, his old college roommate, who promptly diagnosed me with delusional jealousy and prescribed heavy sedatives. I knew something was wrong, but my body refused to cooperate. One afternoon, I found Mark's briefcase left open in the study. Inside was a document titled Asset Transfer Agreement. I picked it up, desperate to read the fine print, but the letters swam before my eyes. My vision blurred and doubled, the black ink turning into illegible smudges. My head throbbed with a pressure that felt like a vice. I dropped the papers and reached for the landline to call my personal lawyer, but there was no dial tone. I checked my cell phone and saw 0 bars. When I asked Mark, he told me the storm had damaged the lines and the Wi-Fi was down for maintenance. The isolation became absolute when Maria, my housekeeper of 7 years, vanished. Mark told me he had caught her stealing silverware and fired her on the spot. In her place came a woman named Nurse Ratched. She was a towering figure with cold hands and eyes that never seemed to blink. She was not there to care for me. She was there to ensure I swallowed the pills Mark gave me. I realized with a chilling clarity that I was a prisoner in the house I had paid for. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Tuesday night. I feigned sleep, breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern until Nurse Ratched left the room. Minutes later, Mark entered. He stood by the balcony door and dialed a number. I opened my eyes just a slit. He looked out at the rain, his silhouette dark against the gray sky. I heard him speak, his voice low and devoid of the warmth he showed me in public. He said that she is about to collapse. He told the person on the other end to prepare the papers because next week would be either a funeral or the asylum. The realization that my husband intended to kill me hit with the force of a physical blow. It was not a sudden epiphany, but a cold, hard fact that solidified in my mind as I remembered the warning Julian Black had given me 5 years ago. Julian was a ruthless competitor in the tech world, a man I had fought tooth and nail for market share, and at a charity gala, he had leaned in and whispered that Mark was a wolf in a sheep's suit. I had dismissed him as bitter then, but now I knew he was the only one who had seen the truth. That night, when Nurse Ratched brought my evening glass of warm milk, I did not drink it. I waited until she turned to adjust the blinds and poured the thick white liquid into the potted ficus by the window. I lay back against the pillows, feigning the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a sedated woman, while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Once the house settled into a suffocating silence, I slipped out of bed. My legs felt like lead, a lingering side effect of the weeks of slow poisoning, but fear gave me a strength I did not know I possessed. I crept to the keypad by the back door, my fingers trembling as I punched in the code. A harsh red light blinked back at me. Mark had changed the security codes. I tried the windows in the living room, but they were sealed shut with new locks. Panic began to claw at my throat. I was trapped in a fortress designed to keep me in rather than keep intruders out. Then I remembered the wine cellar. When we built the estate, I had insisted on a prohibition-style escape hatch in the floor of the cellar, a whimsical addition for a wine enthusiast. Mark, who despised wine and only drank scotch, had never set foot down there. I stumbled down the dark stairs, the smell of damp earth and oak barrels filling my nose. I found the hatch under a heavy Persian rug. It was rusted from disuse and heavy as stone. I pulled with everything I had, my fingernails breaking against the rough iron, the skin of my palms tearing until they bled. With a groan of protesting metal, it gave way. I climbed out into the backyard and was instantly drenched. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the manicured lawn into a mud bath. I looked at the garage but knew I could not take a car. They would have trackers. I kicked off my slippers and ran barefoot toward the tree line. The mud sucked at my feet, slowing me down, but I forced myself forward. Behind me, a beam of light cut through the rain. I saw flashlights dancing near the house, and then I heard it. Mark's voice, distorted by the wind, calling my name. It was not the worried call of a husband, but the hunting cry of a predator. "Sarah, darling, come back inside," he shouted, the falseness of his tone making my skin crawl. I did not look back. I plunged into the small forest that bordered our estate, branches whipping my face and tearing at my nightgown. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I made it to an abandoned gas station about 3 miles down the road, a relic of a bygone era with rotting wood and rusted pumps. Standing like a beacon in the storm was a payphone. I prayed it still worked. I dug into the lining of my bra where I had sewn a tiny emergency kit days ago, pulling out a quarter and a crumpled business card I had kept for 5 years. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. A deep voice answered. "Speak." It was Julian. I gasped out my name. He did not ask questions. He did not hesitate. Container 4, behind the station. Get inside. Do not move. I scrambled behind the station and found the rusted shipping container. I squeezed into the narrow gap between the doors, shivering violently. Headlights swept across the road. A sleek black sedan with no license plates pulled up silently. The back door flew open. I bolted for it, diving into the leather back seat just as another set of headlights appeared over the hill. As we sped away into the night, I looked out the tinted rear window. Mark's silver Porsche tore past the gas station, hunting for a ghost that was already gone. The safe house was actually a high-security office in a nondescript building downtown, a fortress of steel and glass that felt more like a bunker than a workspace. Julian Black sat behind a desk that cost more than my first car, looking at me with an expression that was devoid of pity. He was not there to comfort me. He was there to settle a score. Beside him stood a man introduced only as Cole, a private investigator with the hard, weary eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness as a federal agent. Cole did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid a manila folder across the polished mahogany surface. Julian spoke first, his voice low and steady. He told me that he had been tracking Mark's financial movements for 2 years, not because he cared about my marriage, but because he suspected Mark was embezzling from the Vance Dunn accounts. He was right. Mark had not been expanding our market in Europe. He had been gambling in underground high-stakes poker rings and pouring company funds into volatile cryptocurrency markets. Mark had lost $50 million of our company's money. The figure hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Julian explained that the audit was coming up in 3 months, and Mark had no way to cover the hole he had dug. He needed total control of my shares to liquidate them and hide his theft. For that to happen, I needed to be either dead or legally declared incompetent. Cole opened the folder. The first photo was of Elena. Her resume was not that of a European heiress, but of a struggling amateur actress with a petty criminal record for blackmail and fraud in 3 different states. She was a professional liar Mark had hired for the role of a lifetime. Then came the medical evidence. A medic at the facility had drawn my blood the moment I arrived. Cole read the results. My system was saturated with a potent hallucinogenic sedative that, over time, mimics the symptoms of schizophrenia and eventually causes cardiac arrest. Mark was not just driving me mad, he was methodically poisoning me. The final blow was a video file Cole projected onto the wall. It was grainy surveillance footage taken from inside the penthouse Mark had rented for Elena. I watched in frozen horror as Mark and Elena sat on a plush sofa, drinking wine. They were laughing. Elena stood up, reached under her shirt, and unstrapped the prosthetic belly, tossing the high-grade silicone prop onto the cushion next to Mark. She rubbed her stomach and complained about the weight of the strap. Mark laughed and kissed her, telling her she only had to wear it for another week. They began to discuss my funeral. They joked about whether they should bury me in my wedding dress or the black gown I wore to the last gala. Mark said it would be poetic to bury me with a locket containing his picture. Something inside me died in that room. The Sarah who believed in vows, in love, and in 10 years of partnership turned to ash. In her place, a cold, calculating stranger was born. I stopped shaking. I wiped the tears from my face and looked at Julian. I told him I did not want to go to the police yet. Arresting them was too easy. I wanted them to feel the fear I had felt. I wanted to destroy them completely. Julian nodded, a terrifying smile touching his lips. He and Cole laid out the plan. It was dangerous and insane, but it was the only way to get undeniable proof of attempted murder. I had to go back. I had to play the role of the broken, hallucinating wife one last time. I had to walk back into the cage I had just escaped and lure the monsters into the light. I stood before the mirror while Cole fastened the top button of my blouse. It looked like a standard mother-of-pearl button, but inside it housed a high-fidelity microphone capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. My transformation was completed with a microscopic tracker injected beneath the skin of my left shoulder blade, a dull pinch that reassured me I was no longer alone. Cole spent hours teaching me the art of the breakdown. He told me to focus on a point 1,000 yards away and never let my eyes focus on the person speaking to me. He taught me to introduce a subtle tremor in my hands, just enough to make a teacup rattle against its saucer. I had to become the broken doll Mark wanted to see so that he would lower his guard. Julian orchestrated my return with the precision of a movie director. 2 police officers who were on his payroll drove me to the front gates of the estate. They told the story Julian had scripted, claiming they had found me wandering near the interstate, confused and unable to recall the last 48 hours. When the cruiser lights washed over the driveway, Mark rushed out. I saw the tension drain from his shoulders. He was not relieved that his wife was safe. He was relieved that his $50 million scapegoat had returned to the pen. He played the part of the distraught husband for the officers, thanking them profusely and shaking their hands. But the moment the police drove away and he pulled me into a hug, his grip tightened painfully. His lips brushed my ear, and he whispered that if I ever tried to run again, he would bury me in the cellar for real. The true torture began the next morning. Mark moved Elena into the main house. He claimed it was strictly for the health of the baby, and that she needed round-the-clock care which he expected me to provide. It was a humiliation designed to break whatever spirit I had left. I was forced to bring her pillows and fetch her water while she lounged on my sofas. stroking her silicone stomach and smiling at me with pure malice. I played my part perfectly. I shuffled through the halls in my nightgown, muttering to people who were not there. I poured the pills Mark gave me into the pockets of my robe and later flushed them down the toilet, but to them, I was deteriorating by the hour. I would stare at the wall and scream that the wallpaper was melting or cry uncontrollably because I claimed the curtains were on fire. My performance worked because Mark and Elena became arrogant in their security. They stopped whispering. One evening, while I sat in the corner rocking back and forth, staring at the floor, they opened a bottle of wine and discussed the sale of Vance Dunn right in front of me. They laughed about how easy it would be to liquidate my assets once I was institutionalized. They did not see the recorder in my button capturing every incriminating word. Later that night, while Mark was in the shower, I managed to open his safe using the combination I had watched him type from a reflection in the window weeks ago. Inside was a fresh file containing a power of attorney form granting him total control and a court order for my involuntary commitment to a long-term psychiatric facility. I barely had time to close the safe before my earpiece buzzed. It was Julian. He told me that the trap was set. Mark had scheduled a private signing ceremony at the house for the following evening with a corrupt lawyer to finalize the transfer of power. It was time to end this. The day of the signing arrived with a suffocating heaviness that seemed to press against the windows of the estate. Mark came into the guest room where I had been sleeping and threw a garment bag onto the bed. He told me to get dressed and look presentable for the lawyer and the partners. When I unzipped the bag, I found a long black dress made of heavy silk. It was elegant, but undeniably morbid. It was the kind of dress a widow would wear to a high-profile funeral. Mark had chosen it with a cruel sense of irony. He wanted me to mourn my own life while I was still breathing. Downstairs, Elena was playing the role of the lady of the manor with a terrifying enthusiasm. She barked orders at the new catering staff Mark had hired to replace our loyal team. She rearranged the furniture and complained loudly about the dust. When I walked down the stairs, gripping the banister to simulate weakness, she looked up and laughed. She called me a ghost. She told the staff to ignore me because I was useless and prone to outbursts. I stood there and took it, lowering my head in submission while my heart pounded a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. 30 minutes before the meeting, Mark found me in the library. He was holding a crystal tumbler filled with a cloudy pink liquid. He told me it was a special cocktail to help me calm my nerves so I would not embarrass him in front of the legal team. I took the glass with trembling hands and thanked him. As soon as he turned to check his reflection in the mirror, I poured the contents into a large vase of white hydrangeas standing on the console table. I wiped my mouth and acted as though the drug was already taking hold, letting my eyelids droop and my movements slow. Then I began the performance of a lifetime. I walked over to where Mark was standing and collapsed to my knees. I grabbed the hem of his trousers and wept. I begged him not to throw me away. I promised him I would sign anything he wanted, give him every share and every cent. If he would just let me stay in the guest room, I told him I could not survive without him. It was a display of abject humiliation designed to feed his monstrous ego. It worked. Mark looked down at me with a sneer that revealed his true face. He patted my head like one would pet a dog and told me that if I behaved myself and signed the papers, he might consider letting me stay as a maid for Elena. The doorbell rang. It was the lawyer, a man named Mr. Thorne who smelled of stale tobacco and expensive cologne. He carried a thick stack of documents that he claimed were standard asset protection forms. We moved to the long mahogany dining table. Mark pulled out a chair for me and forced me down, his hand resting on my shoulder. His fingers dug into my trapezius muscle, a silent warning of the pain that would follow if I deviated from the script. Elena sat directly across from me. She placed her hands on her silicone belly and smiled a sharp, predatory smile. She started whispering taunts, asking if I was going to cry again, asking if I wanted to hold the baby I could never have. She was trying to push me over the edge, hoping I would snap so they could commit me immediately. I knew Julian and his team were parked in a van down the street, watching every second of this nightmare through the high-definition camera hidden in the frame of the reading glasses Cole had given me. I could feel the weight of the pen in my hand. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I let my hand shake violently, the tip of the pen hovering over the signature line. Tears streamed down my face, hot and real, though they were tears of fury, not sorrow. I looked up at Mark one last time. I needed him to say it. I needed the recording to be perfect. I looked him dead in the eye and asked him if he had ever loved me or if it had always just been for the company. Mark leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear, confident that his venomous words were for me alone. He did not know he was speaking to a jury, to a judge, and to the world. He whispered that he had never loved me, calling me a stupid woman, and confessed that he had only ever loved the chairman's seat. The vibration of his voice traveled down the wire taped to my chest, capturing the final nail in his coffin. I stopped crying instantly. The transformation was immediate and terrifying to witness. I raised my head, the trembling gone from my shoulders, and met his gaze with eyes as dry and cold as a winter desert. Mark blinked, instinctively recoiling as if he had seen a ghost replace his wife. I smiled, a razor-sharp expression that held no warmth, only the promise of destruction. I picked up the heavy gold pen, but instead of signing, I grabbed the power of attorney document and tore it down the middle with a violent, satisfying rip. I crumpled the pieces and threw them into his stunned face. I stood up, smoothing the black dress that he had meant for my mourning but was now my armor, and my voice rang out with a clarity that cut through the room. I told him that I also never thought he was stupid enough to bring a whore into my house wearing a rubber belly. Elena let out a high-pitched scream as I snatched the antique silver letter opener from the table. I moved with a speed that surprised even me. I lunged across the table. I did not aim for her heart or her throat. I aimed for the lie. With one decisive motion, I slashed the blade across the fabric of her dress and into the mound of her stomach. There was no blood. There was no scream of pain. The high-grade silicone burst open, spilling white cotton stuffing and plastic pellets onto the expensive Persian rug. The lawyer gasped, dropping his briefcase in shock. The camera in my glasses recorded the debris of their deception scattering across the floor like confetti at a funeral. Mark roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure animal rage. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat to finish what the poison had started, but he never made contact. The French doors behind him shattered inward in a shower of glass. The front door was kicked off its hinges with a deafening crash that shook the walls. Julian's private security team and a tactical police unit flooded the room like a tidal wave. Red laser sights danced across Mark's chest and forehead. Men in tactical gear screamed for everyone to get down. Mark raised his hands, trying to salvage the situation, yelling that I was insane, claiming that I had just attacked a pregnant woman. But then Cole walked through the broken doors, calm amidst the chaos. He held up a tablet connected to the room's speakers. He pressed a button and Mark's voice filled the room, loud and clear, confessing that he never loved me and only wanted the chair. Then Cole played the video of Elena taking off her stomach. The room went silent except for the heavy breathing of the officers. An officer kicked Mark's legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard, his cheek pressed against the cold wood in the exact spot where he had forced me to kneel moments ago. As they cinched the handcuffs around his wrists, our eyes met. He saw no fear in me, only victory. Elena tried to run toward the kitchen, but an officer grabbed her arm. The ruined prosthetic hung from her waist, flapping absurdly as she was dragged away. Weeping real tears for the first time since I met her, I stood amidst the wreckage of my dining room, the letter opener still in my hand, watching the man I had married being dragged out like common trash. The chaos of the arrest had settled into the clinical precision of a crime scene investigation. Uniformed officers were methodically cataloging the debris of my marriage while I sat on the periphery, wrapped in a blanket Julian had draped over my shoulders. I thought the worst was over. I thought the betrayal had reached its nadir with the fake pregnancy and the embezzlement. I was wrong. The true depth of Mark's depravity was hidden in a black leather suitcase that a detective found shoved to the back of the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. It was packed tight, ready for a departure that was scheduled to happen within the hour. Inside, nestled between stacks of bills totaling $200,000 and two passports bearing names I did not recognize, was a thin blue file folder labeled with my name. Julian brought the folder over to me, his face grim. He warned me that I might not want to read it, but I had come this far. I needed to see the face of the devil clearly. I opened the file expecting to find the forged medical evaluations committing me to the asylum. Instead, I found a script. It was a detailed, step-by-step choreography of a crime scene, typed out with the cold logic of an engineer. The plan was not to send me to a mental institution. That had been a lie to keep me compliant. The plan was to execute me right there in the dining room immediately after I signed the power of attorney. I read the scenario with shaking hands. According to Mark's narrative, I was supposed to suffer a violent psychotic break induced by the stress of the meeting. The script detailed that I would grab a weapon, specifically the letter opener I had held in my hand moments ago, and lunge at Elena in a fit of jealous rage to kill the unborn child. Mark would then be forced to intervene. He would draw a weapon and shoot me twice in the chest to save the life of the mother and his heir. It would be ruled a clear case of justifiable homicide and defense of a third party. He would play the grieving widower who had no choice but to put down his rabid wife. A shout from the dining room made me look up. A detective was on his hands and knees, peering under the heavy mahogany table where I had just been sitting. He reached up and peeled away a strip of industrial duct tape, retrieving a loaded 9mm handgun that had been secured to the underside of the wood. It had been pointing directly at my stomach the entire time I was crying and begging. If I had not acted when I did, if I had hesitated for even 10 seconds after signing those papers, Mark would have reached down, unholstered that gun, and ended my life before the ink was dry. The final knife to the heart was a single sheet of paper clipped to the back of the file. It was a suicide note, forged in my handwriting with terrifying accuracy. It was a confession of madness. The note claimed that my inability to conceive had driven me to insanity and that I could not bear to live in a world where another woman carried my husband's child. It stated that I intended to take the baby with me into death. The cruelty of it was absolute. Mark had weaponized my deepest insecurity, my 10 years of silent struggle with fertility, and turned it into a motive for my own murder. He intended to destroy not just my body, but my legacy, leaving the world to remember me as a monster who tried to kill an infant. I looked up at the police officers. Even these hardened men, who had seen domestic disputes turn bloody 1,000 times, looked sickened. One officer had to step out onto the terrace to smoke, unable to look at the evidence. I walked to the window and watched as they loaded Mark into the back of the squad car. He looked up at the house, his eyes searching for me. He did not see a victim. He saw the only variable he had failed to calculate. I realized then that I had not just escaped a bad marriage. I had walked out of my own grave. The fallout from that night hit the news cycle with the force of a hurricane. The arrest of a prominent CEO for attempting to murder his wife while embezzling millions was the kind of scandal that shattered reputations and toppled empires. For a week, the stock price of Vance Dunn fluctuated wildly, dipping into dangerous territory as investors panicked over the leadership void. But I did not let the company Mark and I built crumble along with our marriage. I stepped in front of the cameras, not as the victim in a black dress, but as the chairman of the board. I announced that I was assuming full operational control and that the rot had been cut out. The market responded to my strength. Within 48 hours, the stocks had not only stabilized, but were climbing back toward their previous highs. The world loves a survivor. The legal proceedings moved with a swiftness that surprised even Julian. Elena folded the moment they put her in an interrogation room without her makeup or her script. She confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. She told the prosecutors that Mark had recruited her from a casting call for an underground theater production. He had offered her $100,000 and a promise of a life of luxury in Europe once the deed was done. Hearing the price tag Mark had placed on my life was a strange sensation. I was worth less to him than one of his sports cars. It was a humiliating realization, but one that hardened my resolve. Mark fought to the end, but the evidence was insurmountable. He faced a laundry list of charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, securities fraud, and aggravated assault. When the trial began, I took the stand. The Sarah who had knelt and begged for his love was gone. In her place stood a woman who recounted the facts with a clinical precision that chilled the courtroom. I looked Mark in the eye as I detailed how he drugged me, how he gaslighted me, and how he planned to execute me in our dining room. He tried to stare me down, but he was the one who eventually looked away. The jury did not need long to deliberate. A life sentence without the possibility of parole is a certainty. He will die in a cage, just as he tried to put me in one. After the trial concluded, I made my first personal decision as a free woman. I put the Hamptons estate on the market. My real estate agent told me I could get a better price if I waited for the market to turn. But I did not care about the profit. That house was a beautiful tomb filled with 10 years of deceit. Every room held a memory I wanted to burn. I sold it fully furnished because I did not want to take a single spoon or cushion with me. I wanted a clean slate. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment in the city, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and no dark corners for secrets to hide. Julian Black came to me a week later with a proposal to merge our logistics divisions. It was a sound business move, one that would make us untouchable in the tech sector. I agreed to the partnership, but when he hinted at a dinner that was personal rather than professional, I politely declined. He understood. I told him that I had spent a decade living a lie and I needed time to learn how to live with the truth before I could let anyone else in. Trust is a muscle that had been severed, and it would take a long time to knit back together. I did not keep the restitution money the court awarded me from Mark's seized assets. It felt like blood money. Instead, I used every cent to establish the Phoenix Foundation. Its mission is to provide legal aid, safe housing, and psychological support for women who are trapped in abusive marriages, specifically those suffering from psychological manipulation and financial control. I wanted to be the lifeline that I never had. As for my own safety, I made one final hire. Cole, the man who had helped save my life, is now the head of security for Vance Dunn. I sleep soundly now, knowing that the monsters are locked away and the wolves at the door are on my payroll. It has been 6 months since the police dragged Mark out of my dining room, and I am standing on the 45th floor of the Vance Dunn Tower looking down at the city. The streets below look like veins of liquid gold flowing through the dark. A breathtaking chaos that seems so small from this height. My phone buzzes on the marble desk behind me. It is a message from Cole. The text is short and clinical. Mark is dead. He took his own life in his cell early this morning. It seems the pressure from the creditors he swindled did not stop at the prison gates, and the crushing humiliation of his public downfall was a weight he was too weak to carry. I read the words twice. I wait for the grief to hit me. I wait for a tear, a pang of nostalgia, or even a shadow of the love I once bore for the man I spent a decade with. But nothing comes. There is only a vast, quiet sense of relief, as if the final shackle binding me to a suffocating past has just snapped. I look at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass. The woman staring back is different from the one who stood in the Hamptons waiting for her husband to come home. I think back to that afternoon. I remember the exact moment Elena walked through the door and announced she was carrying his child. At the time, that sentence felt like a serrated knife twisting in my heart. It felt like the end of my world. But standing here tonight, with the city lights illuminating my face, I realize that moment was not a tragedy. It was a mercy. It was a brutal, necessary wake-up call that forced me to open my eyes and see the devil sleeping beside me. If that lie had not walked through my door, I would still be asleep, slowly dying from poison in a gilded cage. I walk back to my desk and sit down. A new project proposal for a global security initiative is waiting for my approval. I pick up my pen. It is the same heavy gold pen I used to destroy the fake pregnancy, a tool of my liberation. I sign my name at the bottom of the page. Sarah Vance. The letters are sharp and unyielding. I have lost a husband. Yes, I have lost the comfortable illusion of a perfect life. But in the ashes of that destruction, I found something far more valuable. I found myself. I found a version of Sarah who is resilient, terrifyingly capable, and entirely her own woman. I close the file and stand up. The office is silent, a sanctuary of my own making. No one will ever manipulate me again. No one will ever make me doubt my own sanity or my own worth. I am Sarah Vance, and this life belongs to me. I walk toward the elevator, ready to go home. Outside, the night is deep and dark, but inside my heart, the sun is just beginning to rise on a brand new day. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you. So please leave a comment down below telling me where you are tuning in from so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and survival, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.